in terms of bridging, I think you for yourself, if we look at your life again, you have been also, you've been living on different continents also, right? And how has that been part of your maybe Integra work also, and how has that inspired you, and why did you start to feel like you grew up in the US, I think, for some time, but then you moved to Europe, and maybe there were places in between. What's the, in that sense, also home for you, right?
Home is an interesting question. Well, that's true. I grew up in New York, so most of my life was in New York, on Long Island, outside of New York City, a little island. And I moved. I went to university in the United States, and I studied abroad. But the first time that I really left home in more permanent capacity was to move to Germany. I moved to Berlin, actually, and this was by pure intuition. And I said, okay, I think I'm ready to leave the US. Also, not coincidentally, it was the time of the elections when Trump had become president. I said, okay, I'm gonna leave now. Good timing. And I went to Berlin.
This time you're already out, but
this time I'm already out, so I can just stay away. And I left. That's when I left New York for the first time. I went to a whole new place, in a country I did not speak the language. I didn't have the job yet to get the visa to stay. There was that whole process, and I built a whole new life there. And it was incredible. It really taught me a lot. It taught me about being a citizen of the world, what it means to actually integrate within a culture, what it takes, how to pay attention to what's around me, and to actually adjust to what I feel are the way things should be in my culture and my way of being growing up. And I had already, of course, had a lot of experience in different cultures before. I was always going back to Brazil to see my family. I spent the first few years of life back in Brazil. So I've had always many cultures within me to experience, but this was the first time I was on my own in a brand new culture, trying to make things work. And that taught me a lot about to be humble, first and foremost, because we don't know anything about how things work. Just because they work for us doesn't mean it's the way it is.
Exactly.
And so I went and did this, and after 3.5 years, I moved to Portugal. So I stayed in Europe. So I've already kind of knew a little bit of the way of the world, of the European sort of psyche. But again, a whole different culture, a culture also very different from my Brazilian culture. Although we speak the same language, we're not culturally the same. And I've been here 5 years, really taking my roots here, integrating with the life here. And so there's a lot of learnings on integration, and also why I did what I did, to really reflect on my decisions, and therefore that drives my actions going forward, which is something we do when we're in any kind of an altered state. So we take that time to reflect on what it is that brought us here, why we're here doing this right now. Why did we put ourselves in a, frankly, often uncomfortable position? Because it was not easy to move continents. It was not. Now it's a lot of these global nomads. We just move here, move there. But to really settle on your own, it's a challenge. And so we take time to reflect on what brought us and drove us to do that. What is it within me that made me need to do this? And then how can I show up for others based on what I've learned? That's the ultimate test, I think.
Very powerful what you're saying. Could you share what was your conclusion? And interestingly, you were reflecting after you did it.
Yeah.
Not before.
Not before.
I mean, reflection is, I think, afterwards, but if somehow reflection sounds like going back, right? With so it's maybe, true. But before is maybe just thinking, right? Doing deep thinking. Why is something in me telling me to go?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I didn't have too much of the the why before. It was really intuitive, and it's like a deep knowing that said you need to go there and try this out, see what happens. And it was only after that I actually took the time to say, okay, what really brought me here? What is hindsight really showing me? What is time actually giving me to what's the unfolding look like? And look, in terms of conclusions from that, I'm still figuring it out. Why I actually left the US. I mean, of course, politically, I say that half as a joke.
Yeah.
Because my whole life was, but my life had already been split between, I have family in the US, I have family in Brazil. So for me to move, perhaps it's also a intergenerational pattern. My mother left Brazil when she was around the same age as I. She went to the US. So maybe there's part of me that has this eagerness to see the world and travel and be outside of home and find home here instead of home here. It's interesting. I haven't been asked this. Another first
time question. And maybe we don't need to know, right? I was just curious because you said you reflected, right? I was like, okay, I would be interested in learning about what your reflections were, but that's always a process. And we can, of course, always put our interpretations as we look back, right? And trying to make meaning out of something that and why it happened. Thank you for sharing that.